Hello, everyone. Welcome back to an episode of the Divorce and Separation Coach podcast. Today, we're talking about international relocation before and after divorce. And this is a topic that's particularly interesting to me because working with expats and international families, it comes up almost every time. And so it's a big issue around how can I handle this? What am I allowed to do? And there's a lot of questions that come up in that context to make sure that it's done right, but also that the children are protected, in particular when they're part of that relocation plan. So I'm joined today by Alex Brereton, who is a partner at Hunter's Law. He is a specialist in international family law. So very useful insights for this specific topic. And Alex helps his clients to navigate the financial implications of their relationship breakdown, but also their child arrangements, international relocation questions, jurisdictional disputes, and nuptial agreements. So thank you so much for joining us, Alex. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Great. Well, thank you for answering my questions because I've got quite a few for you. The first one is, I guess, the essence of what we're discussing today. If you're in the middle of a divorce and you're considering relocation, is there anything in particular that people need to be aware of and to consider when they're making that decision?
It's a really, really good question. And I should say, depending on which country you're in and thinking about relocating from, and even to, the answer to that might be slightly different. I obviously come at it from the English law perspective, and the law in England is different even from the law in Scotland and Northern Ireland. And obviously you need to get very tailored advice around all of these things. The starting point from the English lawyer's perspective is always around, when it comes to things to do with children, parental responsibility. And that is a sort of slightly nebulous concept that includes all of the sort of responsibilities, obligations, and rights that you associate quite normally with being parents, and things about decisions about medication, going to the doctor, which school your children goes to. Those big decisions have to be made jointly by everyone with parental responsibility. And leaving the country is one of those things as well. Now, normally, even if you want to take your child away on holiday, just for a period of time, you would generally have to have everyone with parental responsibility agreeing with that. And that goes for separated families. You can have orders made by the English court which say that the children live with one parent or another primarily and spend time with the other. Where you have an order like that that's in place, you can the parent that lives with the child can take them out for up to 28 days without the consent.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot.
But beyond that, you still need consent. So when you're talking about relocating, consent, agreement is really, really important. And so you're going to want to think about, how you can have that conversation with the other parent, and if there's a way in which you can come to an arrangement that works for both of you and avoids any need for a huge argument that involves coming to someone like me and going through the court system, which is a process that is designed to help people, but of course it can become very, very toxic, and it costs a lot of money, and is best avoided if at all possible. You can reach agreement just by talking to each other. You can reach agreement with the help of a lawyer, perhaps writing letters to their lawyer, and you can also go into mediation. And there's, I'm sure you know, plenty of really fantastic family mediators, some of whom are lawyers by training, some of whom aren't. Always get a good recommendation, because there's plenty of people who might not be able to help you, but are mediators as well. So make sure you get a good recommendation, and they can try and take the sting out of making these, very difficult decisions, which seem quite binary. There's, someone goes, someone doesn't, and there's maybe a winner or a loser. But actually, the focus has to be on what's right for the child and what's in their best interests. And so actually, what you should really be thinking about from the very, very start. And perhaps it probably is a good idea, if you think that there might be a difficulty in having this conversation with a partner, to talk to a lawyer privately beforehand, about what you need to think about and how to frame this, because to try and resolve it consensually, but B, if you aren't able to do that, and court is unfortunately the only option left available, then you're going to want to show that you've dealt with this in a conciliatory way, and a way where you're really factoring in not just the other parent's wishes and feelings, but predominantly your child's or your children, and what's right for them.
Yeah. Well, that makes a lot of sense. And I agree that having that advice early on is helpful to make sure that also you understand what the alternative would be to reaching a negotiated agreement, right? People sometimes have delusions around what they would obtain if they went to court, and understanding what it might look like and how likely they are to be allowed to leave the country with the children. It'll help them in having that conversation, because they'll know what to expect if it doesn't work out.
Absolutely, and it's not just the cost of it, or the time that court proceedings can take, but it's also the enormous stress that you have to go through, and which inevitably, even if you're very good at not involving your child or your children, they're clever and they pick up on these things, and so it's
very destructive for your relationship with your co-parent as well.
Yeah.
And how important, Alex, is it to document this agreement? Can it be an informal conversation between the parents, or does it have to be recorded somewhere or put on paper?
Absolutely. So if you're able to agree everything consensually, then there doesn't need to be a written document saying the agreement that you've reached from a legal standpoint. But just if you're going to be going away, and there's no court order in place already in relation to children's arrangements, then if you have a fantastic relationship with the other parent and they're completely on board with it, then that's not an absolute prerequisite, but it is a good idea, and it's a good idea because it makes things very clear. And then also, one party may decide actually down the line that they don't want to agree to that anymore. And if that's the other parent, and you're in a situation where you're maybe halfway through the plans to move, and then suddenly they take away that consent, it's helpful to have that in writing, not because they're bound to it, and it's perfectly okay for them to have changed their mind, but because it shows that they, at some stage, agreed that your proposal, your plan, was in the child's best interests, and it's going to make it slightly harder for them to show that it's not now, and they're going to have to really back up their reasoning as to why that isn't the case. So if you can get it in writing, it's just helpful, because it's an evidential point.
An extra protection, really, in case. Because things do change, and I think that's something people don't always realize. Totally. They might be getting on right now, but then somebody might need someone else, or whatever might happen, and the dynamic changes. So it's always better to have things in writing.
It is, and the courts in this country are very mindful, though, of the things changing, and even if you get an order in place just in relation to where your children spend on the Tuesday night, for example, you can come back a year later and seek a different order, and that's completely open to you. Circumstances change, and the judges are very, very used to dealing with that all the time.
Well, that's great to know. So the other question, Alex, that comes up a lot is, strategically, am I better off deciding to relocate while I'm getting divorced and make all those decisions in one go, or am I locking myself in if I don't plan for it, and if I want later on to be able to move abroad with the children? Is there any advice around that? What's the optimal timing?
There's practical advice, and then there's advice about for you as a person, and what you're going through, and really fundamentally what's in the best interest of your children. So ultimately, if you can't reach an agreement and the court has to be the arbiter of this dispute, the court's focus, as I've said before, is entirely around the welfare of the child or the children.
Yeah.
How are their needs going to be met in this new location? How's their relationship with the other parent going to be supported and maintained? And that flows into every practical aspect of their life. And so you may have, for example, a child who has got a period of time, very short period of time left until they finish primary education and move to secondary education, for example, or there maybe some other aspect of their life that would be better dealt with here in this country, and then after that would be a more logical time for the move. And I always think it's a good idea not to let the sort of legal technical dog wag the tail, if you see what I mean. And actually you need to, if your
first.
priority is the child and also your life, then those are the things that are going to trump everything else. And there's no requirement for you to say, okay, well, we're getting divorced now and we're dealing with the division of our assets and the day-to-day in relation to our children now. But we, if you don't think that you're ready to move just yet, then you don't need to deal with that at that stage. However, having said that, the thinking very practically with my lawyer's hat on, when you're dealing with, so when you get divorced, it's a very straightforward administrative process about the legal side of your divorce. But in tandem with that, you're often going to be discussing and reaching a settlement in relation to the division of your financial assets. Now, the way the court assesses what should be a fair division of your financial assets in England and Wales is it looks at a whole range of factors, and they're all set out at Section 25 of the Matrimonial Clauses Act, which is a thrilling read. But one of the key principles behind that is looking at needs and what housing needs do both parties require, and what income needs are they going to require going forward. Now, if you are going to be, or you think you might want to be living in a different country and with your children or your child, then your needs and the needs of the child might be different in that country. The cost of housing may be different, cost of schooling may be different. All manner of different things may be different in that new location. And so it may be worth bringing that into the discussions around the settlement of your financial affairs, so that you know that when you do move, and if you're able to move, then you're taken care of, and you're not going to be left high and dry in a situation where you don't have the funds that you require.
So are you saying that if you reach an agreement, assuming you're staying in the country, and then a year or two later you decide to relocate, you're stuck with those agreements? You can't amend them to reflect the new circumstances?
There are provisions for variation of financial orders, but that doesn't apply to everything made in a financial order. And so you may be left stuck with certain decisions that you can't change. You may be able to vary things like maintenance. Child maintenance is generally variable going down the line. But some of the other aspects of what you agree may not be. So you should certainly take advice around that.
Okay, that's helpful to understand, because that has quite big implications when there's a lot of marital assets to split up. You're going to want to think of that. So the child maintenance, I'm assuming the spousal maintenance as well. There is some flexibility if there's a movement. I mean, I know, for example, there's different tax laws. In most of Europe, child maintenance is taxed. The person who receives it pays tax on it, which is not the case in the UK. So your number goes down by 40-odd%. Is that something that can be amended easily, or what's the process for amending that if you do move?
So the provisions in relation to the enforcement of child maintenance, and indeed spousal maintenance, when one party lives abroad, France, wherever, are very, very technical. And they've also changed recently, because we've, very sadly for some people, withdrawn from the European Union.
Different rules now.
And so you should absolutely take technical advice around those things. You can this country were a signatory of the Hague Convention on the mutual enforceability of maintenance orders, and most other countries in the European Union, save I think for Denmark, are also signatories to that, and also plenty of other countries worldwide. There's actually a and beyond that, also the UK has treaties with several other countries around the world that allow for that mutual enforceability. And there's a list of all those countries on the government website. They're called REMO countries. So if you have an existing spousal maintenance or child maintenance order in this country and you require it to be enforced in another jurisdiction, then if that jurisdiction is a REMO country, there's ways and means for that to be done. And certainly variation can be a part of that process.
Okay, that's good to know. And just to clarify, because we're talking of a scenario where you're taking the children with you, is there anything you need to be aware of if you're moving away as a single parent, so you're leaving your children behind? Is that something that can be in any way restricted or dealt with by the other parent who doesn't want to be left behind?
What do you mean exactly?
So if say the husband gets a job opportunity in Denmark, and he was living in the UK close to his children, seeing them alternate weeks, whatever the arrangement was, and he suddenly moves away to Denmark without the children. Is there anything the wife could do or the ex-wife could do in that context, or is that completely left up to their individual decision?
In terms of the children's arrangements and the level of contact going forward. So it's if you're going to be leaving the country and you can't reach an agreement in relation to, or the agreement is that the children will stay at home with the other parent, or stay in the UK, stay in England, and then you're going to presumably want to maintain as much contact as possible with those children, whilst you won't be living with them every day. And that will, obviously, there's so many factors that will be involved in that. How long are you proposing to go away for? Is it a temporary contract that you're fulfilling, or is this a longer term move, maybe with a new partner? Are you also, is it going to be very, very far away? Are you just nipping over the border to Calais, or are you going to Singapore? And all of those will be relevant to decisions around the level of contact that you might want to have, and the level of contact that you can practically have. This conversation now we're having on Zoom, and the world has completely changed, and the courts are very, very used to making orders around arrangements for children where one party lives away that require contact via Zoom or via Microsoft Teams, and just even if it's just for 30 minutes every other day, or whatever the arrangement is, just so that relationship, the immediate relationship with the children, is maintained, and those very banal conversations about homework, but that you can have them, and they're so important to actually remaining an important figure in that child's life. You can also have an agreement put in place that may be reflected in an order, or you can go to court for an order requiring that there is also physical contact from even when you're away. So it may be that there's provision for the children to come when they're on holidays to spend time with you over there, and vice versa for you to go back to the UK and spend time with them here. Certainly, just because you are going to be moving away and leaving the children behind does not mean that you throw away all your rights to seeing your children. And from the perspective of a judge looking at it from over here, the children's rights to see you and spend time with you and maintain that relationship with you, which is so important for them as they grow up. And so, you should absolutely not think that you're throwing that away. And there's plenty of powers that the court has to help maintain those relationships.
And you're not relinquishing any rights with regards to child what was the term you used earlier on, parental responsibility?
Yes, no, you're certainly not doing that just by moving away. Absolutely not. I mean, what you want to be showing is that they remain a priority for you. Don't go away, switch off your phone for a year, not have
Disappear.
any
Yeah.
contact with them, and then come back to this country perhaps and think, oh, I'm just going to start the same relationship from day one, because you you may find that the court sees that as a very damaging thing to have done in terms of the child's welfare needs,
Yeah.
and you may find that if you want to go back to having some kind of 50-50 shared care arrangement, that if that is to be implemented at all, it would come in a very staged way, because the court doesn't like to, generally speaking, jump children from one regime to another
Mhm.
regime. That's completely
Okay.
different. Continuity is seen as something that's very important.
That's good to know. So one of the parents moving without the children, I mean, even with the children or without the children, that would lead to a renegotiation, basically, of the child arrangements to represent and take into account the new context.
Yes.
Okay. And so I think it would be helpful is to hear from you what you would recommend people do and not do when it comes to relocating children internationally. Are there any mistakes that you would want to warn people against that can be very costly and impact them negatively? And on the flip side, is there anything that they should be doing ahead of time and really thinking through as they progress with those plans?
Absolutely. I don't know whether to start with a do or start with a don't. Sometimes
Whatever works
it's
best.
nice to start with the do, but I actually will start with the don't.
Okay.
I think these kind of conversations that you're having around moving abroad and a real dramatic change in
Yeah.
your life and the life of your child, and the ability of the other parents to see that child, they can become very, very toxic and very, very difficult very, very quickly, particularly if there's already other issues between you. Those can become very, very quickly explosive, and it can be really hard then to get back to a place where you can have an adult, mature discussion about actually what's in everyone's best interests here. And one of the courts, if the court is going to be required to help deal with it, one of the things that it will look at is, if you're the parent that wants to leave the country, how are you going to be maintaining the relationship with the other parent, the child's relationship with the other parent?
Yeah.
What are you going to be supportive of it? Are you going to do the things that you're telling me you're going to do at this point, or are you not? Is your motivation really just to get as far away from them as possible? And so when you are having these conversations, you may find that tempers flare, and you want to say things that you may later regret. If that feel like that, try your best not to extract
Yeah.
yourself from the conversation at that point, and then come back to it when things have calmed down slightly. What we find is that people send all manner of very upsetting messages on WhatsApp or whatever
Yeah.
that then get shown later down the line, and say, well, okay, well, you're telling the court that you're going to let me see the child on these holiday days, and I'm going to have Zoom contact and this, that, and the other. But actually, look at this WhatsApp where you said the most awful opposite things.
Yeah.
And so you just be mindful that everything like that is recorded, and you don't want that to appear again. I should also
Good one.
say the English court and judges here are very, very mindful that people do blow off steam on WhatsApp. And if you have written a really insulting message, don't worry, that's
Yes.
not going to completely torpedo everything. It happens all the time, and none of us would like our private messages to be read out in that way, and that's completely understood. In terms of the do, and something that is a really good idea is before you even broach the idea, make a plan. Think
Okay.
about, really practically speaking, how is this going to work, and how are you going to make sure that it's your children's welfare needs are properly met in this new country, and is it in their best interest, and how are you going to make it in their best interests?
Yeah.
What are the schools? How old are your children for a start? Where
Yeah,
are they in life? What are the important things to be considering because of that? They may be very, very young, and what's the nursery situation like over there? What is the primary school situation like over there? What curriculum are they going to be studying there? And is that extremely different to what they've been doing here? If that is an issue, are there British schools in that jurisdiction, or a school at least with the similar curriculum or capacity to operate a similar curriculum, particularly if you're at a stage where they've started slightly older and doing important exams? Those are all like really, really important factors. And if the worst happens and you're left having to go to court about this sort of a dispute, then the evidence around that sort of thing plays a big part. So the best thing you can do is probably talk to a family lawyer. I do say that if you can cut family lawyers out of your life as much as possible, that's a very, very good thing. But for something like this, you should get in there early, talk to a family lawyer about your circumstances and the things that are going to be really important going forward, and how you can then frame your discussions with the other parent in a way that's totally child focused and child centered. That I think is a really good idea.
I think that point around the proposal, coming to the table with a proposal so that the other person can really picture what you're proposing and what you're suggesting here. And there's a lot of things, of course, there's how often they're going to physically see them, but making technology available to the children so that they can reach out. And the big one is who's going to pay for the travel, even if the children can travel on their own. Who's going to pay for that? Who's going to arrange it? So there's a lot of details like that people don't always anticipate. And I work a lot with my clients in thinking through all of those different topics that they want to make sure they think through and document as part of their arrangements, because those are usually the ones that lead to a lot of arguments afterwards. Everyone assumes and no one's really on the same page, and that can cause a lot of conflict afterwards. So it's important to think through all those different elements that are going to come into play. Who keeps the passports is another big one.
Exactly. Yes. These really minute little points that you wouldn't think about because you've obviously got much bigger things to agree, but they are really important. Then the cost of them adds up. The cost of flights to Singapore will very, very quickly burn a big hole in your wallet. So yeah, absolutely.
Especially if you have to escort the children, you might want to think through at what age are you going to let them go on their own, those kind of things, because that can also be quite complicated. Where does the parent stay if they're escorting the children back and forth? There's just a lot of implications to think through.
Totally.
And so do you have any don'ts? I can think of one, but I'm pretty sure you're going to mention it as well.
Well, go on. What would you think of?
I was going to say, don't leave with your children without asking anybody's permission. Don't kidnap them effectively, or go on holiday and not return. Those kind of scenarios are not the way to go.
And we do see that a lot. And then you have effectively kidnapped your child, and you get down a really ugly set of court proceedings that you don't want to be involved in, and you probably will end up with an outcome that you really don't want. It's absolutely not to be encouraged.
It's not really showing good faith in trying to find an agreement with your ex, is it? It doesn't put you in a very good light to try and get the court's permission.
It's not, and if you end up in an argument around that, if that's what happened, and then the court proceeding is instigated on that basis, you end up. But again, it always comes back to the child, what's in their best interest, and not only what is in their best interest, but whether those interests can be met. Here better or there better, and it's not somewhere you want to end up at all. So don't do that.
We agree on that one. Is there anything else that you wanted to add to your list of don'ts?
I mean, I think my first don't in terms of try and maintain good relations is a really good one. I think don't forget what the relationship has been like before with the other parents. I mentioned earlier, the court really cherishes, and cherishes probably not a very loyally word, but really prioritizes that sense of continuity. And so if you have a shared care arrangement here in this country that's existed for a good period of time, then you're going to really need to show how you're going to prioritize that relationship, that level of contact from overseas, and that's going to be difficult. It will involve a lot of these kind of Zoom calls, but also provision for contact, physical contact as well. And you may find that you need to be, thinking about those journeys back and forth for quite a lot. So don't underestimate how much what has been happening will factor into decisions about what's going forward.
That's very sound advice. So everything we've been discussing has been in the context of international relocation. But what happens when it's relocation within the same country? It could be quite far. If you live in Bristol and your spouse is moving to I don't know, to Nottingham or whatnot, it's quite a distance to travel. Is there anything from a legal standpoint that needs to be done in that context, or is it okay as long as it's the same country?
It's a really good question. If you're moving from Fulham to Putney, or one village to the next, the court is not going to be interested. If the child's life, the centre of that child's life and its networks and its social networks and familial networks and the clubs and schools and societies that your child belongs to are not going to be affected really by that kind of move, then you don't really need to worry about that sort of thing. But as you say, an internal relocation can be a really long way, and you'll find that actually a huge amount of the changes that child will experience are very similar to the ones that will experience going to
it's very
and again, when the court is asked to deal with a decision like that, it looks at the welfare principle and the welfare checklist, and looking at how that child's needs are going to be met in this new location. Generally speaking, in practice, an internal location may be slightly easier to achieve than an external one. But what you find is that more often, or more commonly, when you're having an internal location, you're starting from a position where there might be a more or less a shared care situation, and so being able to maintain that in this new location is very difficult. So you shouldn't consider anything like that as a slam dunk just because you're staying within inside England. But in terms of the process for planning and thinking about how you're going to have these conversations with your partner and what you might need to show evidentially to a court if you couldn't agree on it and you needed to apply for an order to allow you to move, it's very similar, the process.
Good kind of conversation. I guess you're right. It's around the impact that it's going to have on the parenting relationship and the arrangements that you had in place. If you're doing alternate weeks, then that's not going to happen anymore. The children's not going to be in two different. The children are not going to be in two different schools. So there's things like that to take into account. And it's true, it can have exactly the same impact as an international move. So it's important to think it through and to, as you said, discuss it and come up with a plan and try as much as possible to find a suitable arrangement. There's a lot of things you can do to kind of round the edges of the move and to make sure that relationship with the parent who's left behind doesn't break down.
One thing I've not really mentioned is your child or your children's wishes and feelings. When they're a 3-month-old baby, that's not so important. But as they get into their teenage years, they become more like adults. Those wishes and feelings become much more important to any court determination of what might happen. So you need to also think, is this going to be a popular decision with my children? Are they going to find this incredibly disruptive? And if so, do I need to rethink what I'm planning.
Yeah. Now, would the court hear the children in this kind of case?
There, what you tend to have is a social worker,
Yeah.
either independently or appointed by the court to report,
Okay.
and that will involve conversations with both parents. And
Okay.
if the children are slightly older, then yes, they will be involved in that
Okay.
process, but not generally speaking in the courtroom.
Okay. They have a voice, even if it's through someone else.
Yeah, and I should say that there's plans for reform around the voice of the child in this jurisdiction. In
Yeah.
other countries, it is much more common that you would have maybe even a judge talking to the child,
Okay.
whereas that doesn't tend to happen here. But who knows? If we're having a general election, things may change very
It
very
might change.
dramatically going forward, and that's just something for us lawyers to keep an eye on.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, if back to where you said very early on around the option of mediation to try and find an agreement, you can leverage child-centered mediation to try and get their voice heard, making it clear that they're not making the decision, but that they're being consulted because it impacts them.
It absolutely impacts them, and particularly once they're slightly older, it's these decisions will have a big impact on them growing up, and you've got to think
Yeah,
about your relationship with them years down the line. And
absolutely.
so yeah, it's right that they should be involved to an appropriate extent.
But that's a great point that you raised there. So I always like to finish the podcasts with the same question that varies a little bit based on the topic we're discussing, but what would be your top three tips for somebody who's thinking of relocating right after their divorce?
Absolutely. I mean, there'll be a slight amount of rehearsing things that we've already said. I think my fundamental point is make a plan. Don't
Yeah.
don't make a decision like this and start a conversation about it on a whim or because
Mhm.
you're feeling very negatively towards the other parent.
Mhm.
Um, Planning around this has to be child focused, child centered,
Yeah.
and it really is all about them and what's going to meet their needs going forward. So sit down with a cool head and think about really what you're planning and really how you're going to make it happen in a way that is going to be good for your children
Yeah.
and your child. The second point, which again we've discussed a little bit, is for goodness sake, try and do things consensually if you can.
Yeah.
There's all manner of resources available online, but also through programs of mediation and with people like yourself as well, to help that you know you navigate what can be a very tricky process without having to involve the court. Um, and that's you can still absolutely and you should get legal advice, but you can take a lot of the unpleasantness and sting, which can be damaging for many years afterwards, out if you're able to have these very adult, very serious conversations in a positive way.
Yeah.
And I think that my final point would be, at the outset, get some advice, get some
Yeah.
proper legal advice, because this is not a straightforward thing that you're proposing to do. And absolutely, in terms of you've highlighted it, child abduction
Yeah.
is a very serious issue, and I think when we think of kidnapping in this country, we don't tend to think about that being by a parent.
Yeah.
Actually, the vast majority of child abduction cases are by where the abductor is one of the parents,
Yeah.
and the circumstances are always complex and generally speaking very sad.
Yeah.
And you should just be mindful that decisions in relation to a child are very serious, and so don't take anything lightly, and yeah, go and speak to someone about what you're planning to do, so you know that what those plans are aren't going to cause any or going to cause minimal difficulty
Yeah.
for
Yeah, and taking your child away, even geographically, from one of the of their parents is always an important decision and something that should be really thought through,
you. Yeah,
and as you said, done in the best possible way. And I love your points. The point around planning, the point around communicating and trying to find a resolution out of court. Um, And of course, your final point around trying to keep things, in the long term working well, and don't do anything stupid with your
Yes,
children abroad without the other person's permission. I think those are all very, very good points, and things that we know when we're calm and rational, but we tend to forget when we're wrapped up in all the emotions of divorce. And of course, we're dealing with our children's lives, so we care. So it's
absolutely.
difficult to make those decisions. Thank you so much, Alex. It was really great speaking to you. A very interesting conversation. I
Thank you.
appreciate all your insights and your tips.
Lovely to meet you.
Take care.